Hello again and welcome, my dear friends. I'm Ryan Campbell. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm here today with Tom Crosby. Tom, you are the president of the Tuolumne County Business Council.
Good morning, Ryan, or Supervisor Campbell. And
we're informal here.
so you don't have to call me Mr. President. I won't call
Mr.
you.
Okay.
I won't call you Supervisor Campbell. But
Okay.
Thank you very so much for inviting me to your conversation.
Oh,
Happy to be here.
I'm so glad to have. I've been wanting to talk to you for a while because this is kind of a thing that I think is really interesting to a lot of people. Is just it's hard to know what's going on in the local economy necessarily. You know, you hear rumors and that kind of thing. But you're the president of the Business Council. So could you kind of describe just briefly what is the Business Council and what are some of the things that you do there?
Sure, certainly. So the Business Council formed back in 2008, and its primary purpose is to promote business growth, wealth creation, economic development, and to work closely with the community and our local government. Legislative issues, ordinance, policy, anything that might affect the overall business climate. So we're different from the chambers in this regard. We don't focus on specific businesses to help them internally figure out how to be more effective. It's a broader range of sort of ecosystem enablers for business is the area that we're focused on. And we're looking at expanding our engagement to include regional, like RC organizations. That's a regional, a group that looks after the rural counties that we share, connecting with state legislators in Assembly and Senate, and our federal partners as well. So and in concert with local government in that effort.
And you just described the economics as an ecosystem, which I find that fascinating because the way I interpret that is something that, you have private businesses, you have property owners, you have local government, you have state government. Is that kind of what you mean by an ecosystem?
Well, it is, and it's a little broader.
And of course, you have consumers. That's the most important.
The most important part, right? But you have to have a starting place in that cycle. And so, economic development. The definition of economic development is essentially wealth creation, and wealth creation comes from people applying themselves in terms of developing products or services. And so we call those jobs, and then businesses are the fabric that contains the mechanisms to enable employment. So a place that defines a product or a set of services, and it engages employment, and and then all the other things that are required to make those things happen. So that's And then ideally, if a business is creating products and services that people want, then the consumers consume them, and there's a value proposition there, and then that serves the consumer's needs, but also generates use tax, sales tax. If the business is constructing, a commercial building or a residential building, eventually you get property taxes from that. So it's like all the revenue stems from this effort.
And how healthy do you think our local economic ecosystem is?
I think we're pretty healthy, particularly compared to other areas. I think we have some isolation from some of the perturbations that occur in other areas. We're relatively stable. For example, our population has grown 1.8% over the last 10 years. Mm-hmm. So in terms of the population, it's relatively stable. We have relatively good visitation and tourism activity, particularly even in the downtimes, because people are looking for a way to escape the concerns of the world and get back up to nature, and we serve that purpose really well, and that helps us with revenue, and kind of smooths out the bumps a bit. The needs of the community are relatively stable in that regard. We don't have some, wide swing, industrial swings going on.
And is that kind of what you mean by, we're insulated from some of the broader economic trends that are going on in the state? Is that we just...
Yeah, we're not seeing layoffs and our job, we're not seeing like rapid job creation things happening in the community. There are jobs available for people, and I think our employment's relatively stable. We're not seeing a lot of problems with that. We're still impacted or affected, not impacted, but affected by the cost of money and inflation.
And
those kinds of things.
I was kind of curious about that because, we talk about broad economic trends. That's a very large one, and it's affecting the entire country and the world. And, when you talk about inflation and scarcity, a lot of that was sparked during COVID. We had chip shortage.
Yep.
Nobody could buy toilet paper. Remember that? Remember that? There was a couple months there. That's one for the history books, right?
Yeah, right. Completely emotionally driven, not really.
I guarantee you somebody is writing a thesis about that. There's probably many. But, there were legitimate drivers of scarcity, and thus when you have scarcity, you have inflation, and also government policy has a great deal to do with what happens with inflation. We can talk about that too. But,
of course.
We're still seeing some of this inflation affecting even our local economy. Mm-hmm. It's hard to get materials. I know even with the county, when we get equipment and materials for roads, we purchased a new hot patch machine, and that machinery was held up for months just because we couldn't. It needed 2 axles that were very beefy and industrial grade axles. Couldn't get them. We had to go to a completely different vendor just to get the axles for a piece of equipment that we already purchased. So things like that.
Sure.
How is that having an impact on our local economy? And do you see it as, for lack of a better term, is it legitimate, or is it being driven by, maybe some gamesmanship of the system, or maybe some emotional reactions that people have, and they're buying it, just like with the toilet paper, people buying it out of an emotional reaction and not really rational behavior. Right.
Well, I think there's 2 sides to that equation. One is actual market-driven prices that are, that impact us as well, like the cost of gasoline and diesel fuel. And the cost of eggs and milk and these kinds of things. So
eggs is the big thing right now.
So people make personal choices around, you may be driving less, maybe changing the menu or whatever they're going to do to map into that. So those are real, and but the other side of that equation is on the investment side. So because the cost of money has gone up, for those that invest, they've throttled back, so they're not doing so much investment anymore, and the dollars are not flowing back into the economy from a investment and growth standpoint as strongly as they were before.
Where are they going then?
But again, they're holding on to the money and waiting for the market to sort out, right? So the inflation's high, and as soon as it makes the top, which it may already be there, I don't know, we'll see, and it starts coming back down, then the investment money will start to loosen up, and people will start reinvesting again. It has a lot to do with what the consumer confidence, what that looks like.
All right. And what kind of businesses do you have represented in the Business Council? Yeah,
so the Business Council is not that large. We have about 45 members. Yeah. They would be all the companies that you would know here. They're the larger businesses and institutions that carry the bulk of the labor force as well. So interestingly, we have about 3,200, roughly 3,200 businesses in Tuolumne County. The self-employed is obviously a large part of that number, but we do have about 2,000 of our businesses actually have employees. Yeah, it's a fairly stabilized thing. We do see some new businesses coming in and out, and there's opportunities we have storefronts that are still available and things like that to grow.
Well,
but what we really need to grow, let me just speak to this for just a second.
Yeah.
Every time we add a resident, we generate about $55,000 of potential taxable income. Every time we add a business, we add about $550,000, $500,000 of potential on average, potential taxable income. So it makes sense if we're going to raise the prosperity of the community that we encourage business to the extent that their products and services will be consumed with our existing population. And we're not saying that we're necessarily growing the population, except that we do need to grow our workforce in specific areas to support those businesses. But economic development is a lot about bringing on new businesses, and particularly businesses that can utilize our local resources and our local labor.
Yeah. Well, how do you do that, though? How do you encourage business development and economic development in general? What talking about?
Yeah.
There are other factors involved. There's government agencies. There's regulations.
Yeah.
Also, you need to find people that have the capital to start a business from scratch, which, as I'm sure you know, is not an easy thing to do.
That's right.
How do you encourage and make Tuolumne County look more attractive than, say, a neighboring county or somewhere else in the state or the country?
Right. It's the ease of doing business here is a big factor, and of course the TAM, the total available market for any particular product or service is like the starting place. You have to have a demand. You have to have demand for what you want to do. And then given that you have demand, you can put together a business plan, then it's getting the financing for it, unless you're able to, internally grow from an existing business capability. And there are resources. I don't think we necessarily have a problem with financing a good business plan. I'm not seeing that that's a major obstacle. I am seeing that labor force being employees that have the right skill set, given the business that they want to do, if those individuals have to come from outside the county and come in, we have a pretty serious housing shortage in that workforce category on the housing ladder. If you look at that's another ecosystem, the housing ecosystem, for another conversation another day. Very, very complicated. But we're pretty limited in terms of workforce housing, and we can go down that path and talk about average income levels and average home expense levels and those kinds of things, and rent and mortgage rates and things like that. But the net of it is that we're short of workforce housing, and so that becomes a factor. And then the last one I think you touched on already, which is how conducive are we as a government in attracting and supporting businesses. And this has to do with permitting, fees, the timing that's involved, because time is money when you're trying to build and start a business, getting PG&E attachment, making sure that the rest of the infrastructure is there to support it. Those are a little more intractable, a little more difficult to deal with, and that is actually the primary target area of engagement for the Business Council, is to try to help our community be more conducive and more open and attractive for business. And part of that also has to do with the size of business and the type of business that comes in. So we have this awesome opportunity of all this biomass up here in the mountains that is essentially a fuel load threat to our lives, and we have the ability to extract some of that and turn it into something that's useful. And we have a number of companies that are coming up looking at doing that. So
Right, and that was another thing I wanted to ask you about is do you see the growth sectors in our economy? You touched on biomass. That's a huge one.
yeah.
But we also see, a lot of the tree companies are growing. It's hard to hire anybody to do construction right now in the county because everybody's booked up.
Yeah.
What are some other areas that you think are the real hot sectors of our economy right now?
Obviously, forestry and the resulting resource utilization from that is a huge opportunity for us. So you touched on that already, and our contractors are fully engaged, so that's great. So that's and they're expanding to the extent that they can. But again, that's workforce housing that's required for that. We have this wonderful expansion at the chicken ranch that's going on, a huge investment that the tribe's made down there. That's fantastic, and that's bringing a lot to the economy. Obviously, a lot of that goes to the tribe, which it should, because that's the investment that they're making. But it's helping the economy, and I would say the potential untapped one, and this requires more investigation. So this is just a personal opinion at the moment. Is the coordination of the visitation and tourism industry that we have. We have a lot to offer visitors and tourists, and to the extent that we can make engagement with the county seamless and smooth and interesting and coordinated, I think there's a benefit in that, in doing that. Visit Tuolumne is just doing an absolutely awesome job, and we have to find a way to help support and keep that going as best we can. But I think there's also another dimension to it potentially to investigate, and that's having the chambers and our township groups working together to figure out how we can maximize the utilization of our tourists, right? Have them going here and then here and then here, and have them spend more than a day. Have them stay overnight. In which case, then we need more hotel accommodations, and we need high-end restaurants and all these things. So it's just we have all these things, but we need to dial it up. I'm advocating that we should dial it up because it gets back to the beginning of the conversation, which is that it's costing us more and more to operate as a county every year. So the expenditures are going up.
Yeah.
And we need to offset that with revenue. And we really only have a couple of paths for that to occur. One is to work with the state to allocate more money to the county to pay for our needs. And that sometimes comes in the form of grants, but grants usually have strings attached. They're usually very narrow. They're difficult to acquire. It's one-time money. It's not really sustainable income. So that puts it back in the lap of the community. The business council and the businesses that are here. We kind of own that next thing, which is figuring out how we raise the revenue, which is, more wage earners means that's more taxes that you can utilize, and business revenue that's taxable, TOT tax, that's the transit occupancy tax, that's a little bit of money that we get for everyone that comes up to visit us, and that's really important to help offset the costs of running our community, operating our community. So the business council sort of like in all those spaces simultaneously. We're trying to figure out how we can have our local government be as efficient as possible, focused, working on the things that the community needs them to work on, and we're trying to be a constructive, positive, partnering voice in that effort. And we are about trying to reduce regulation and barriers that pop up.
What's the biggest barrier that you see right now? I mean, if you're talking about regulation,
from the government side.
yeah, is it county regulation? Is it state regulation?
I think it's primarily state. I think our county staff is stuck between. They're really bracketed between mandates that come from the state. You know, the state for. Let me preface this by saying, I think everyone's trying to do the right things for the right reasons. You know, the state has a vision. The legislature, Senate, governor, they have a vision for how they want California to operate, to behave. And they manage that behavior through dollars and how dollars flow. That's essentially what's happening. And so that is a strong influence on the county government. And then the other side is the community and what its vision is for its life and what it wants to do. And that's an influence on the county. And our supervisors are, right in the middle trying to sort that out and trying to tie those two things together and close the gaps. So I'd say that right now my sense is that regulation and the complexity of the presence of regulation, the administrative costs that are involved in managing the regulations and the policies, that is probably our biggest barrier right now to growth.
Really?
I think so.
Yeah.
I think that I don't know. It's a tie between that and encouraging growth, which is complicated because growth needs to be tied to what the community wants to have happen. So, we need to be able to assess, all of us that live here, we're here for a reason, and we're attracted to this place for a reason. And so if we're going to have prosperity rising, there's going to need to be some degree of change, and we're going to have to be careful about how we do that. It's a controlled change, and it needs to be synchronized with the will of the community.
I think you hit the nail on the head there. That's, to me, I see that every day, where there's this tension between, we're a rural community with a great history and tradition, and there are many people that don't want to see anything change. They moved to Tuolumne County, or they grew up here, and they stay here because it is like it is. And so the idea that we would change or evolve or bring in new types of industries, there's a hurdle there to overcome. And but then on the flip side of that, you have people that they want to start businesses, they want to come in with new ideas and change things, and so there's that tension there. And I see it reflected in county government. There's that tension within government as well. It's that, of course, growth versus no growth kind of thing.
Yeah.
I wanted to ask you a question out of left field, if you'll permit me.
Of course.
What do you think of like Bitcoin and cryptocurrency?
No, I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan. I'm a fan.
Do you think it's over?
No. Oh no, heavens no. I think there's some huge benefits to it. In all fairness, I am a technologist from the Silicon Valley. Now that said, I grew up in a small town in Southern California, same elevation, so I'm home right at this point. I totally get this environment, and that's why my wife and I are here, and we're retired. So everything I'm doing is just as a service to the community, and I'm not employed by anybody here. So, but I am an investor. But I'm just that's where that that's at.
So you didn't make your millions on Dogecoin.
No. So no, that's that. You're really getting back to that. No, we're blessed and we did really well, but it's because we engaged in companies that actually created value.
Yeah, I'm just gonna say it's a fad, because I don't see it as a sustainable type of investment strategy to buy cryptocurrency. It started from post 2008 economic crash. People had legitimate insecurity about fiat currencies in different countries, including the dollar.
Of course.
And so they came up with this idea: we want to have a currency that's not dependent on any government or any central bank or which is kind of that free market utopia kind of idea.
Yeah.
But what happened is people started buying and trading it like a commodity. Like you don't typically. I don't go down to the bank and say I want to withdraw all my money and have it in cash and hold it at my house in the hope that the value of those dollars will increase.
Right.
That's exactly what was happening with cryptocurrency, and then so you end up in a Ponzi scheme,
right,
where you're always trying to sell it to the next person, and everybody knows that it can't go up forever, but they just don't want to be the last person to be holding it.
Totally agree. I think it evolved in not the right direction. Let me say though, it has two characteristics that are very important, and it's the reason why it's going to probably continue in some form. And I have a background in cryptology, so I understand the dynamics of why cryptocurrency is called crypto and what a benefit that is. So it is secure in that regard. As a value element, it's very secure. It's traceable, trackable. So that's an important characteristic. But the other one that's actually more important is the rate at which the value can propagate through the system. It's very fast money.
Okay.
So, and it's extremely low cost to transact.
What do you mean by that? How can currency be fast?
Okay, so cryptocurrency. What cryptocurrency provides is for a normal user of a currency to be able to utilize the same technologies that the large institutional users of currency have, which is that they can transfer value electronically at extremely high speeds and at a lower cost. So for us to transact money between each other, if we were to use a check that goes through a bank or some other mechanism like that, there are costs involved in that transaction that aren't adding any value.
Well, Tom, if someone is interested in learning more about the Business Council, or they'd like to contact you, or maybe if they own a business and they'd want to see about signing up, how would they go about doing that?
Yeah, you can if you just search for Tuolumne County Business Council, it'll be right there. It's hooked up pretty well.
That's great.
And you can send us a message, and we'll reach out. And it's a private organization, and there's a membership involved, a membership fee involved, and all those kinds of things. So it's not free. It's not a community, service in that regard. It's a fairly contained group, but you do a lot of good work, and a lot of good data is coming out of it. So really appreciate your efforts, and please come back and join us again. We'll talk more. Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Thank you very much. All right. Thank you, Ryan. Take care. And thank you for joining us. I'm Ryan Campbell. I've been your host for the day. Please join us again next week for another interesting conversation about Tuolumne County. Take care.